Good morning. It's Friday, September 5th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now a sobering 700 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. The specter of a Gaza City operation is still hanging over the Middle East. So is a hostage deal. So is the collapse of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So is the declaration of a Palestinian state. If all of this seems incongruous, that's because it is. A hostage deal would negate the need for a wider war. The declaration of a Palestinian state would be meaningless if the Palestinian Authority collapses in Judea and Samaria. In short, this news cycle is nuts. And I don't mean nuts like those tiny little bags they give you on the plane. I'm talking about a Costco bag of Brazilian nuts, those huge ones that nobody likes eating. As for me, I'm waiting for actual news because right now the headlines seem to be mostly based on speculation and wild speculation at that. Today's guest is Israeli-American journalist Emily Schrader. Emily is all over social media these days, and she has her finger on the pulse of all the hot topics we cover here on the FDD Morning Brief, with Iran in particular. Emily's a repeat offender here on this show, as you may know. My conversation with her is coming your way in just a few minutes, so hang tight for that. Today is a grim milestone in the war launched against Israel on October 7th, 2023. Today marks 700 days of war. The duration of this conflict was unimaginable when this war kicked off nearly 2 years ago. Israel's defense doctrine is about fighting short wars on enemy turf, like the 12-day war Israel fought on Iranian soil in June. So much for that. And yet, Israel emerged the victor on 7 fronts, from beepers in Lebanon to drones in Iran. Israel has taken care of business. And yet, the Gaza war drags on. In fact, several Gaza battles are happening simultaneously. One is the asymmetric war against Hamas. Israel can finish the war, but it must tread carefully if the remaining 48 hostages are to be rescued from those tunnels. Another battle is public opinion. The media, the UN, and several foreign countries have weaponized the rules-based international order. It's tripping Israel up on the battlefield. Finally, there's the blood libel. Famine allegations continue, even as Israel and other countries flood Gaza with food. The charges persist even as Israel doubles, triples, quadruples food deliveries to an enemy population. 700 days later, Israel wants the war to end, but not on uncertain terms. Israel's enemies must be defeated. Deterrence must be restored. If it's properly finished, this will be a once-in-a-generation kind of war. If not, we might see another 700-day conflict in another few years. And that's why Israel's war against Hamas, against the UN, and against persistent blood libels isn't over until it's over. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Israel launched a satellite into space. It's called OFEC 19. It was reportedly launched into orbit at 10:30 p.m. on Tuesday from central Israel. The launch caused a little bit of panic among Israelis on the ground who briefly thought the satellite was an interceptor missile, possibly targeting a Yemeni missile, that kind of thing. By Wednesday morning, Israel's defense ministry confirmed that the satellite had successfully entered orbit. The OFEC 19 is an observation satellite. It's designed to help the Israelis gather intelligence and capture images like the ones that helped Israel take it to the Islamic Republic of Iran during that 12-day war this summer. Apparently, this particular satellite can take pictures of objects the size of a football. Go Eagles, by the way. If you saw the game last night, wasn't bad. During the day as well as at night. It's a testament to Israeli innovation, and as Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz noted, also a warning to Israel's enemies that they've always got eyes on them, and they do. Headline 2, some new information yesterday about Iran's nuclear program. Apparently, Tehran had increased its stockpile of enriched uranium in the weeks before Israel launched its first preemptive strike on the program in June. The details are all in a confidential report prepared by the International Atomic Energy Agency, also known as the IAEA, and seen by the Associated Press, which reported on it. On the first day of the war, Iran had about 450 kilos, or 972 pounds, for those of us that don't do the metric system, of 60% enriched uranium. That's an increase of 32.3 kilos, or some 71 pounds. Again, for those of us that refuse to learn the way the rest of the world does metrics. This was from May. In total, the regime had accumulated about 21,000 pounds on the opening day of the war. 60% enriched uranium is a hop, skip, and a jump away from weapons-grade uranium, which is, of course, 90%. As for what's left of Iran's stockpiles, well, that's unclear. UN inspectors haven't been able to verify anything for over 2.5 months and counting because the regime refuses to work with inspectors. Headline 3, the Shin Bet thwarted a plot to assassinate Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. And it's kind of a wild story here. The plot traces back to a Hamas cell based in the West Bank city of Hebron. This particular cell was under the command of Hamas leaders in, wait for it, Turkey, also known as the worst NATO ally ever. The plan was to kill Ben-Gvir with explosive-laden drones. The terrorists had already purchased multiple drones. Israeli forces seized the drones when they arrested the would-be assassins a few weeks ago. The suspects are in custody and investigations are still ongoing. And I must say, Ben-Gvir seems to be enjoying the spotlight. He's just giddy about all of this. All right, it's time for my conversation now with Israeli journalist Emily Schrader. Without further ado, let's bring her on the show. Welcome to the program, Emily Schrader.
Glad to be here. Always glad to join you on the morning brief, and a very good morning from Israel. I wanted to give you a prettier view, but my phone actually overheated from the Tel Aviv sun. So here I am in my kitchen.
I was going to say, we had nice leafy Tel Aviv background, and now we've got like, I don't know, your Miklat or something. But
not quite the Miklat, very close.
Okay. But you know what? Still great to have you, whatever the background. All right. I want to start with the latest news out of Iran. I know you're in touch with folks over there. You're in touch with the opposition to the regime. So what are regime opponents saying right now about the state of domestic repression inside the country? We're hearing that since the war with Israel, since those 12 days, that repression has gone through the roof. There have been arrests of Jews. There have been arrests of purported spies, but there's also a huge crackdown across the country, is there not?
Yeah, I mean, even from the time that the war was still ongoing, I was hearing on the ground that the primary reason that people weren't going out and protesting in the streets, especially in the cities, is because immediately the IRGC and the Basiji forces were out on the ground trying to prevent people from gathering. It's part of the reason that they immediately cut off the internet, too. But when the ceasefire was declared, it actually got worse for the Iranian people. We've seen that there's been over 21,000 arrests so far. There's been, I think, 160 plus executions in the past 30 days alone. There have been some of them, of course, related to this, being falsely accused of being Mossad spies. They've just been rounding up pretty much anyone in order really to save face and present themselves as being somehow in control of the situation after such a humiliating infiltration by Mossad at so many different levels. That being said, there's a lot of frustration on the ground that I've heard. There's a lot of frustration towards not Israel, interestingly, but actually President Trump. They were very, very disappointed. They felt like he sort of pushed through this ceasefire deal and didn't allow Israel to finish the job. Whether or not that was actually the plan, that is how it's been perceived by some. Unfortunately, what we're seeing on the ground is that that's continuing. There are a lot of people who continue to get arrested. There are people, even sources that I have that I've written about in articles as a journalist that I've used as sources, people who I haven't heard from since several days after the war. I can only assume that they have been arrested or at the very least interrogated, and hope for the best at this point. But it is really abysmal. And add on top of that, everything we're seeing with the lack of water, the lack of electricity, the complete lack of control that the Islamic Republic itself has over their own countries. I mean, that we joked about how the skies are being controlled by the Israeli Air Force, but it's really a lot more than the skies. This Islamic Republic is not in control right now.
Well, I mean, just pulling on the thread there of Donald Trump, we have heard that he forced the Israelis to probably end that operation maybe a day or two earlier than they had hoped. Of course, he did a huge amount of good in striking those nuclear programs with those heavy munitions. Some are saying that all of what you've just described is a sign of how brittle the regime is. Obviously, losing control of your skies for 12 days is kind of a sign of that. Making mass arrests, I think, another sign. You talked a little bit about some of the environmental challenges and some of the management challenges that the regime is facing. Are we seeing real signs of decay inside the Islamic Republic? I mean, are you getting a sense that this is like precursor to collapse? I mean, how would you describe what's going on based on what you're hearing?
I mean, they're definitely worried about a collapse. There was a concert that was organized in one of the cities in Iran just a few days ago that the regime ended up canceling last minute because they were so afraid that it would turn into a protest. So it's very much on their radar, the level of threat that they're under, the level of hatred that the Iranian people have for this regime. But right now, they're trying to put band-aids on the situation. So that's why they have so many forces out on the ground. It's why they're doing so many arrests. And there's also a lot of searches and seizures that are going on inside people's houses. They have had checkpoints even since the 12-day war. They've left some of those checkpoints in the major cities, checking people's devices to see if they're speaking to Israelis or if they can be framed as working with or for Mossad, which is funny because the majority of Iranians actually have quite favorable opinions of Israel and Israelis. So it makes sense that a lot of them would be following pages or speaking to Israelis in different capacity, even if they don't particularly support the Israeli government. So despite that, I mean, I think the Islamic Republic is using that fact against their own people, which is what regimes do when they're starting to lose control. We're probably going to see it get worse for the Iranian people before it gets better, but it is very much teetering. And I think that that's one of the reasons it's so important for the West to step in, not militarily, but to crack down on all of the sanctions that we already have lined up to ensure that the E3 moves forward with the snapback sanctions, that there isn't a resolution that says, oh, we're actually going to delay it or we're going to have negotiations. The goal of snapback, excuse me, shouldn't be negotiations. It should be snapback sanctions. And I think that's something that's been kind of lost in how everything is being handled right now, and also in the last 46 years with the regime.
Yeah, well, it's not lost on us here at FDD. We keep pushing for snapback sanctions, and we're hoping that the Europeans hold tight here and actually follow through. I do think they've opened the door for negotiations, and we're just going to, I mean, in my view, negotiations won't help much. I think it's just going to delay the inevitable and probably empower the regime at a moment where it looks like it's weaker than it's been in a long time. So, you know, I think getting to the people of Iran, as we've been, I think, referring here, are they getting enough support from the United States or the West or from Israel? I mean, this is ultimately their fight, but the lack of support feels striking to me. Am I missing something here?
Well, you know, I actually spoke with the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Huckabee, about this a few days ago, and the fact that a lot of Iranians are concerned about what I said, that they feel like Trump forced Israel to stop the war, and that somehow has prevented the fall of the regime. That's not what's going to make the regime fall. Realistically, we need to see a presence in the streets. We need to see people on the ground doing things in order to make that happen. I don't think that the West is supporting the Iranian people enough, but not how you might think. A lot of people, when they think of Western involvement in a potential regime change in Iran, they think that means military. I'm not talking about military at all. I'm talking about actual support for the people. First and foremost, the most important thing is that they have internet access. You know how impossible it is to assemble a mass protest at any time through any platform when you have no cell phone service, no internet. You aren't able to assemble on the streets, even small groups, when there's IRGC checkpoints at every corner. So we need to figure out a way from the West in order to ensure that no matter what the regime does, that the people are able to pull together. Right now, they don't have that at all. In addition to that, one of the ways that we saw a revolution in 1979 was through the strikes, through worker strikes, through some of the key industries in Iran. There have been many strikes since then. There have been many strikes that with the intention, for the intent of bringing down or pressuring the regime. Unfortunately, they don't have the economic capacity to continue a lot of those strikes for an extended period of time. So exploring options or methods for a strike fund, also a key option that the West could do, or could build a program in order to support the Iranian people. And there's other tools as well that the Western nations can assist the Iranian people in organizing and assembling in an ideally peaceful way. But either way, a way that will be in the hands of the Iranian people and not of foreign leaders or of foreign political agendas, rather what the Iranian people actually want to see on the ground. We can do more. We aren't doing it. And we really, I think, as all Western democracies, but especially the United States, need to call on our elected officials to pay attention to this issue. It doesn't have to be a war. It shouldn't be a war. It needs to come from the people.
Yeah, and obviously, look, communications, tech, hugely important just to allow the opposition to communicate with one another. Strike fund, I think you mentioned, that's a way of allowing them to have an impact on the government without necessarily locking horns with the government. But there's also the question of intelligence. I mean, actually helping the opposition understand where the regime is going to deploy its forces, how crackdowns are slated to take place. These are all things that I think the United States and the West should be doing. And I don't know if they're doing enough of it. I feel the frustration, and I'm sure you hear it from the folks that you talk to on the ground.
I want to mention one more thing I think is
Yeah.
really important that a lot of people miss. Israel received a little bit of criticism for the strikes on the Iranian Broadcasting Authority buildings. I just want to point out that this is not media how we think, and I'm saying this as a journalist, this is not media how we in the West think of media. This is an organization that's the formal mouthpiece of the Ayatollah himself. It is a network that has aired forced confessions. It is a network that actively supports the arrest, torture, and execution of innocent Iranians all over the country. And it's something that needs to be shut down. And what we're seeing right now with the Israel war is the importance and the value of the diplomatic war, of the PR war that we're seeing. And that is one of the tools, the key tools of the Islamic Republic of Iran, whether it's social media or otherwise. And so targeting the IRIB buildings or the Islamic Republic state media, not media in general, but state media, is very, very different. And this is something that we need to be active on, not in terms of bombing it, but in terms of perhaps even hacking it or engaging in other types of cyber activity in order to stop those forces from perpetrating a lot of the disinformation, this active disinformation about what's going on both inside of Iran and also in the region throughout all of the Middle East.
Yeah, and cognitive combat has been a hallmark of this war. Let's be clear. I mean, what's going on with the reporting out of Gaza, some of the stuff that we've seen out of Lebanon, out of Yemen. I mean, there is an attempt to try to influence, to confuse, to gaslight the international public. Toby Dershowitz, FDD's Toby Dershowitz, has written actually a terrific report about IRIB for those that are interested in reading more about it. But it is truly just a deplorable institution, and certainly one that I welcome, whether it's kinetic strikes or hacking or any of the strategies that you described. It's certainly more than warranted. What about the regime's ring of fire strategy? I mean, it obviously doesn't seem to be holding up particularly well right now. The entire strategy of the October 7th attacks and the war that followed seem to have collapsed. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you feel like there's still some semblance of the original Iranian strategy? Do they still have cards to play, or do they look like they're just flat on their back and maybe using whatever's left of the Houthis and Hamas to try to take it to Israel? But even there, the power's waning. Am I missing something there?
I mean, I think Israel has definitely dealt a very, very deadly blow to Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. Shall I keep going? We've definitely seen a significant impact in that ring of fire that is no longer really a ring of fire. We still see the Houthis firing ballistic missiles, including with cluster munitions. That will be dealt with, as we've heard from the Israeli government. But beyond that, I think the concern here is that we see Iran looking for other options. The Islamic Republic is not ready to throw in the towel. They will fight to the very end, even if it means harming their own country and their own people. And that is what we're seeing. And right now we've seen more of an effort to influence Venezuela. I mean, they're controlling the drone facilities there. We also see efforts in Sudan to build up a potentially new proxy terror organization. So they will try to find other methods of attacking Israel and other countries that they wish to see fall. If that will be successful, that remains to be seen. It depends a lot on how the international community responds to the activities of the regime right now, which is one of the reasons that I'm so against the E3 creating some kind of a deal that would alleviate anything, literally anything, for the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is not the right step right now, not for the people of Iran, not for the future of the region or of the world.
Yeah, and I'll just say the Sudan thing has me concerned. I've been a part-time student of Sudan for some time, actually, since studying at Hebrew U as a grad student in Israel. Looking at Sudan, and once upon a time it was an Al-Qaeda safe haven. It's where Bin Laden found safe harbor. Hamas had trained there. It was a Sunni jihadi safe haven. Then the Iranians came in and they really took over the country. Then they get removed forcibly, in part by the Israelis, in part by the new Sudanese regime. But the country has slid back into civil war. The influence of Iran is creeping back in. And this is, of course, after Sudan had actually agreed to a normalization agreement with Israel. So we've got a lot at stake here with Sudan in particular. For me, that's one that I want to continue to watch. I would not welcome Sudan as a sort of a new element in that ring of fire strategy, as some of the other ones are getting snuffed out. Emily, last question before I let you go. You've been very generous with your time. I want to ask you about the mood in Israel, about a possible second round with Iran. I personally shudder to think about that. I was in shelters for a couple of days in Israel before getting out of Dodge during that last war. I know you were probably there for the whole thing, and so were 10 million other Israelis. I know it was not fun. I mean, let's just be honest here. This was not how most people wanted to spend those 12 days. People walked away with some trauma. People walked away with sleep deprivation, which, by the way, is real. I mean, we've all been sleep deprived, but it's a different kind of thing when, like missiles are waking you up in the middle of the night, and it's a constant thing. And then you try to go to work the next day. So I know that the Israeli public does not welcome this, but I also keep hearing that another round might be necessary. So tell us why that's the case, and maybe also how you feel about another round.
Well, I've been very candid from the beginning, even prior to October 7th, that we're not going to see a meaningful change in the Middle East and the situation with these different Islamist terrorist organizations, whether Sunni or Shia, until we see regime change in Iran. And I think that this is just the end result of what we're seeing. As long as this regime continues, that threat of a renewed conflict is going to continue, because they're not going to give up their nuclear ambitions. They're not going to give up their ideological fight of funding and exporting terrorism all over the region. And they're not going to give up their obsession with destroying the Jewish state. So this is something that we have to accept as reality, that the West has to accept as reality before we can build a concrete plan for actually dealing with that. And so I do think that we are going to have to see, unfortunately, another round of conflict at some point with the Islamic Republic. Again, I want to emphasize that the best way to avoid this, just as the best way to avoid what already happened in the past, is full enforcement of sanctions, full support for the Iranian people. We can do this without another war, but we need support from the international community in order to do so. If they don't, I can guarantee you we will see a renewed conflict between Israel and the Islamic Republic. And it's not that I support it. No one wants to see war. But I will say that when a ceasefire was quite abruptly declared or announced during the last 12-day conflict, I had more than a few messages from Israelis saying, I gladly would have stayed in a shelter for a few more days if it meant that there could have been a meaningful change on the ground in Iran. And I think that that's the attitude of a lot of Israelis. They do know that the Iranian people support Israelis. They're the people who have been on the streets with us since October 7th. And even prior to that, some of the only people who have stood by Israelis throughout all of this conflict, because they know the reality of the terrorist organizations that they're fighting, because they live with it as their government. And so I think we will see something. No one wants more war. We're all tired. But the attitude is a little bit different when it comes to the Islamic regime in Iran versus the situation in Gaza, because I think a lot of people do see that there is a potential end solution that brings both people together and can bring a new era of peace, at least I hope, for the Middle East.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Emily Schrader, for joining us today, the 700th day of this conflict, on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you.
All right, always good to hear from Emily. Here's what's on tap for you today. In the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, FDD Sinan Gidi unpacks Turkey's secretive partnership with ISIS during Obama's second term. Sinan argues that Turkey's support for the Islamic State was part of Ankara's effort to combat the Assad regime in Syria. The strategy, at least back then, backfired, helping ISIS hurt Turkey's reputation and offered no lasting tactical benefits. Of course, now we see that Turkey has partnered with Al-Qaeda, and they're now in charge of the state. Like I said, worst NATO ally ever. Meanwhile, my colleague Brad Bowman published a piece in the New York Post about that military parade in China this week, celebrating the 80th anniversary of Beijing's triumph, as they called it, over Japan in World War II. Despite Chinese President Xi Jinping's knack for showmanship and China's undeniable military expansion, Brad says the U.S. can and should take concrete steps to deter Chinese aggression in the Pacific. Yes, please. Finally, FDD's Mark Montgomery, Joanna Yang, Craig Singleton, and Jack Burnham, 4 of them, published an FDD Insight analyzing 10 lessons from an exercise they conducted in Taiwan, simulating a Chinese attack on Taiwan's energy sector. My colleagues highlight the need for the U.S. and our Indo-Pacific allies to support Taiwan and that the Europeans to step in the economic arena. If you're curious about what that looks like, I encourage you to check out the piece on our website. And with that, another episode of the FDD Morning Brief has been entered into the historical record. If you're craving more think tanky stuff over the weekend, check out the expert analysis on our website. That's fdd.org. You can also read our quick takes on X or watch the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. They're getting better every day, I got to tell you. And yes, you can still make that generous tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest anytime. The website's open day and night, even on weekends. All right, tune in Monday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. It'll be another good one. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.